It can raise really big questions for us. Questions about meaning, about hope, about God, and sometimes also about how we kind of keep going through the hard times. We're really privileged tonight to hear from three people. Martin, I need to hold this and use my hands. Martin, Rob, and Billy. And they are going to be sharing parts of their own life. Some of the topics we'll touch on are really big, and we are going to be moving at quite a pace because of time. But we will have a time for Q&A at the end, and if you don't get a chance to ask your questions then, we will have time afterwards where you can come and speak to one of the panellists. So a quick practical note. If you need the bathroom at any point, there is a toilet just outside or down the first flight of stairs. But without further ado, I'd love to invite each of you to just quickly introduce yourselves to everyone.
Yeah, I'm Martin. I work for a charity, so helping people with spinal injuries.
Yeah, I'm Rob, I'm the token scouser on the panel. Thank you. Scousers get everywhere, don't they? So yeah, I'm obviously originally from Liverpool, but now living in Shropshire, in Ellesmere, and I'm now a pastor. But it wasn't always that way, which you'll find out later. And I'm Billy from Belfast in Northern Ireland originally. I live just north of Liverpool, now I have a place called Ormskirk. Retired from the pastor 2 years ago, and currently working for the Missionary Association, Slappy Gospel Association, and keeping me out of mischief.
So Martin, we're going to start with hearing your story this evening. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your childhood and what life was like for you growing up?
Sure, yeah, so I grew up, and honestly I had kind of like an idyllic childhood really. I think it's one of those things you just sort of, you don't really realise until you look back, you know, kind of how blessed I really was. So I grew up in South Oxfordshire, sort of just below the Cotswolds and by the Chiltern Hills. And I grew up in a Christian home, which, you know, I just thought was normal. And I was a sports mad, played every sport you could play, football, cricket, rugby, did boxing, all sorts, so absolutely love that. I was indoctrinated by my father, who was from Liverpool, who put Liverpool into me in terms of the football and the theatre. Yeah, just had lots of friends and really a wonderful childhood, so I think,
And as you moved into kind of like your teenage years, what did life kind of look like for you then? Did you carry on with school and everything?
Yeah, carried on with sport and just went really smoothly, really at that time. I still believed, and I still went to church and everything, but I started to sort of live not quite how I should have been living. I sort of went away from how God would want me to live my life, and went along with friends a lot, and started to go to parties, nightclubs. I had girlfriends, just like went along with the crowd really. I sort of put off God a little bit. I sort of thought, I'm young, I'll put that to when I'm older. I've got plenty of time. Started to live not how I should have been living.
And you went to Canterbury Uni, is that right? Yeah. And around that time you were at uni, and what did life like there? And also, I know that was around the time where you were drafting. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I went away to university, and I don't know if people have been at university at that time, but really everything was sort of geared around drinking, really, and parties, and I kind of exacerbated the issues that were kind of already sort of creeping in really. So in my second term of my first year at university, I was just walking home and took a shortcut, which was not really I'm not a huge fence or anything like that, but I climbed over a fence that I've done much more dangerous things in my life, but this time sort of caught my jeans and it was kind of how I fell really. So I fell back and I ended up breaking my neck at C6, which is quite a high grade. And I don't think at first I realised I was still thought I was sort of invincible, so I didn't quite realise the gravity of what I'd done. I think until I saw my family, and I sort of thought, like, wow, you've just like really done switch your life, you've affected those around you so much as well. So I went straight into hospital, obviously very seriously. Went then into intensive care.
And obviously, intensive care might be something that unfortunately people here might have experienced or have had loved ones go through. For anybody who hasn't, could you just share a little bit about what that was like for you?
Sure, yeah. I was in intensive care in King's College Hospital in London, and it was like a surreal place really. It's very sort of dark. The place was almost like underground, so you had not much natural light. And everyone around, most of the people in there were sort of unconscious or really struggling to survive really. I was not able to move any part of my body apart from my right arm. I had a tube going up my nose that was feeding me. I had another tube going in my mouth that was sort of breathing for me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink on my own, I couldn't even speak. In the world's eyes, obviously, I looked like this is almost like the worst situation someone could be in. And the incredible thing was that I've never felt closer to God during that time. It was absolutely amazing. People often do the TV or the radio to watch things like that, but I didn't really want any of it. I just felt so close to God. And the amazing thing was during that time, I can honestly say that I had just a real joy, like, that just defies understanding. It was just bubbling up inside me, and that really just sort of carried me through that time. It's so amazing.
And obviously, you said that in the world's eyes, your situation looked, I guess, quite hopeless, and yet you had that joy. Where do you think that joy came from? What was the source of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, I said that I was, Christian and stuff, but I became much more serious about my faith, during that time. And I mean, you can ask my parents and my wife, my parents. I really do have that joy like every day, and that only can come from God. I really do believe that. It just must be from God. It's definitely not from me. It's not like in my strength that I'm able to do that. Yeah.
And so during that time when you were in hospital, you spoke about that joy that you had. Were there other things that kind of helped you through that season of recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my family and friends absolutely massive. Like, I was in hospital for 10 months in total, and I had a visitor every single day of those 10 months, which is just incredible, Unfortunately, I actually had a thing called MRAB, which is, it's like MRSA, you might have heard of that, but it's actually worse. So, the hospital near to me, Stoke Mandeville, you might have heard of it as well, they didn't want to have me. Eventually, I got in there, thank God. It was only about 10 minutes from my house, so family and friends came, and we had like house group meetings around my bed. Mates came in, we had poker games around the bed as well. Roast dinners in that room, because I had to stay in the same room for 10 months, so I wasn't allowed out of it at all, in case I got infected any of the other patients, so couldn't go to the gym or anything like that. Yeah, God just blessed me during that time. I had Bible verses all around, and it just gave me that hope that so many other patients unfortunately didn't have. And it was again, if I was understanding, but it was a really wonderful time.
And I know it's quite a story about how kind of ended up actually getting into that hospital with certain MP, so people can kind of guess and maybe ask you afterwards who that, or you tell it, not really.
Well, yeah, they didn't want me in the hospital at all because there were a lot of bad publicity about MRSA and things like that. But we actually went to the MP to try and get to see if they could get me in. So my dad went to see Boris Johnson, our MP at the time. And to be fair to him, he did actually do that, right? So he got me into the hospital, so it was good.
And obviously, after that time in hospital, you obviously returned to a life that would have looked very different than maybe one that you sort of envisioned for yourself when you were younger. I imagine that there have been kind of subsequent challenges since then. And how do you face those on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, it's funny with spinal injury. I think when I looked at people in a wheelchair before I had the accident, I just thought they'd be exactly the same as everyone else, but just sitting down, you know, and walking. Amazingly, the walking is not the biggest issue. There's so many other things with the bladder and bowels and the pressure sores and infections and all these different things. They're the things that actually get you more and frustrate you and everything else. So, yeah, just like, again, like, God gives that peace that defies understanding, and He's with me every day. You know, He gives me joy every single day, you know, in my life. And I do have that hope as well, you know, of heaven and, you know, new body, and when there'll be no more tears and no more pain, you know. So that's a wonderful thing. But yeah, just bless me. Like, I came home and He's helped me to get jobs, you know, so I'm working full time now. So then a couple of years ago I moved up here, and the biggest blessing in my life, I met my wife at church, you know, which was just incredible, and, you know, heavenly ordained, it really was. If people see me seriously, they'll know that God's answered. So yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah, just helps with everything. But yeah, really, I just think every single person is going to have suffering in their life. Every single person here will know suffering. And being a Christian doesn't mean you're going to get any less suffering, that's for sure. But I just think, you know, if you are going to have it, you may as well have God with you, you know, but not really. So
Thank you, Martin. On that note, there's so much more we can say, but thank you. And if you have questions for Martin at the end, we will get to those. Thank you. Rob, we will move on to you now. Now, the part of your life we're going to talk about is a little bit later on, after you've been a Christian for many years.
Yeah.
But could you tell us a little bit about when you first heard about Jesus and what difference that kind of made to your life initially?
Well, I guess I first heard it when I used to be in the Scouts and the Cubs, and we'd have church parade, so I would go to church parade, and then my nan started driving me to church. She used to go to church at the top of the road, United Reformed Church, and I'd go, because my nan wanted me to go. To be honest, I only went for the girls, because they were talking about God, but it was going in one ear and out the other. So yeah, I had some contact with church, and I used to go to Liverpool Cathedral every Christmas with my mum to the carol service, and I really enjoyed that. But no, it was really when I was in secondary school, and I had a physics teacher who was a Christian. Miss Humphreys was her name, and she would stop the lesson to tell us about creation and stuff. You wouldn't get away with that these days, would you? And I would egg her on, because I was the one who would try to get her to stop the lesson, because I really hated physics. So I would just hit her with loads of questions, and get all the lads around me to have a go at it. Anyway, she got me in the corridor one day, and she said, "Rob," I said, "Yes, miss." She said, "I'm praying for you." I said, "Go away, miss, go away. What would the lads say?" She said, "No, I'm praying for you." Anyway, fast forward 5 years, so I was about 15, 16 then. and my sister was really ill. She was on the verge of anorexia. She'd had a very toxic relationship, and as a result of that, she was really struggling. And next door but one to us moved in a fellow called Bill Bible, which was a pastor in Liverpool. Some of you might know him. And my mum knocked on his door because she was desperate for my sister. And he said, well, I'll have a chat with her, but bring her to church on Sunday. And our Jane was really, really low. Really low. Anyway, she goes to church with my mum. I didn't go. And she came back and she said, Rob, you've got to go to church. I said, no way I'm going to church. No. But I was football, I was drinking, I was, you know, I had lots of girlfriends, just leave it at that. And that wasn't my life. I was anti, if you like. But because it's your sister, and because if anyone knows my sister, she usually gets her way, and she basically dragged me to church the following Sunday. And I dragged me then girlfriend as well, and I just sat there and I thought, wow, this is actually making sense. For the first time, it had gone in that ear and started to affect how I felt in my heart instead of just going out the other ear. And and over a period of about 3 weeks, I think it was, I decided it was true, that Jesus is actually the Son of God. Something I've never really thought about. But then I thought, well, if he is the Son of God, then that has to affect my life. And it has. That was many, many years ago. I'm 62 now, and I like to say I'm the same age as Brad Pitt. He looks alright for 62, doesn't he? So that's how I came to faith.
And then kind of like jumping ahead to sort of like your late 30s, what did life kind of look like for you at that time then?
Yeah, so I was living in Congleton. We were going to Wheelock Heath Baptist Church. I was heavily involved in the ministry there, doing Sunday school, doing youth work and stuff like that. Married to Jill with 3 daughters who were, I was permanently skint, let's just put it that way, you know, and mortgage and all of that. I had a really well paid job. I ran a mobile phone repair business with about 300 staff. So that was quite high pressure stuff. My commute to work was from Congleton all the way to Nottingham every day. So that was a good, especially if you got there at the wrong time, hit the traffic. It was 1.5 to 2 hour commute every day. So there was a lot of pressure to feed the family, and a lot of pressure from work as well. Yeah.
And kind of having that kind of intense job, did you sort of notice yourself that pressure was beginning to build, or did you not see it at all?
Well, I think, ask me why, I'm quite laid back, that's my character, but people were starting to notice that I was perhaps a little bit sharper than I normally was, and I think Jill was struggling with me a little bit more than normal. She said, looking back, she said that was the toughest period of our marriage in those 3 years when I was a general manager of this business. But it did. I didn't notice it because I thought, no, I'm all right, I'm fine, I'll just get on with it. But no, it was the creeping tide of pressure and anxiety was just starting to come in, but I didn't notice it at the time.
So when did you notice it? Did it all kind of come to a head one time?
Well, it was like a crescendo. So I was, I'm still there. I was, it was a Friday night. I was driving back from Nottingham in the car, and I took a phone call from the accountant. I was rushing back to get to the youth work at Wheelock Heath, and I took a phone call from the accountant just to say, we've lost this amount of money on this account that we haven't booked. And normally I would have gone, okay, Nick, do this, that, this and the other. But I said, okay, Nick, I'll just put the mobile phone down. And from nowhere, I burst into tears. Now, I hadn't cried since my nan's funeral, which was a good few years before. I just did not cry. But I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I just could not stop crying. So again, Jill rang me, and I was like, oh, down the front, she don't do this. She'd never seen me cry. Anyway, I got home and said, don't let the kids see me. I went straight upstairs. I just could not stop crying. I thought, what's going on here? Anyway, Jill said, you've got to go to the doctors. I said, I'm not going to the doctors. I never go to the doctors. She said, you've got to the doctors. I said, I'm not going to the doctors. Anyway, I did. I went to the doctors and I got signed off. For what was initially a month, and he wrote down acute stress syndrome on me. And anyway, I ended up being off for about 4 months. But prior to that, about a year and a half before that happened, I'd sat in the church at Wheelock Heath, and there was a sermon preached, and I felt like I was the only one in the room. The room was full, but it was like the fellow who was preaching was just talking to me, and it was about stepping out from the workplace and stepping into ministry. My heart was pounding, and yeah, at that point, the Lord, through the preached word, and that happens through people speaking, God can speak through them. He was working on me to step out of work and go into the ministry. But I didn't have the faith. I bottled it because 3 kids, mortgage, a wife who kept shopping at the next catalogue, So I just did not have the faith. So I kept on saying no to God.
So when you took that time back from work and you took that time out, that must have been you did quite a secure job. You said about worrying about your family. What was that time kind of like? What did it look like over those few months?
Okay, because I was so busy, and our world gets so busy, don't we? I had very little time to pray as a Christian and to think and to ponder. We fill our lives with so much, especially now. This was even before the smartphones where we're scrolling all the time. We fill our lives with so much stuff that we have very little time just to think and pray. And as Christians, just to open up the Bible and see what God has to say to us. So I wasn't doing anything. But in that time that I was off, I was able to do that. Jill and I, we prayed, and I really did meet with God through His Word, and through talking to people in the church as well, and seeking counsel about what the next step was. But it wasn't, that first, it was very dark. It was depression. I know many of you will have suffered from depression, and the doctor put me on some pills initially. But about 3 months into me being off, there was a lot of clarity coming. And I knew that actually the reason that this was happening was because I wasn't saying yes when I should have been. I wasn't doing what God wanted me to do. And this is how we work sometimes. If you're not going to go willingly, He'll get you. Anyway, at the end of this, I decided to take the giant leap and go to Bible college. Didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I thought, well, maybe He wants me to be an RE teacher. But no, so I took the big step of faith. Also, at the time of my crisis, Jill had just handed a notice in. She was a part-time teaching assistant at the local school. Because I wasn't around and someone needed to be there for the kids. So she handed a notice in. I'd packed my job in, so there was no money. Thankfully, she got her job back. Anyway, yeah, so I decided, right, Bible college for me.
And now you are a minister
Yeah.
in Ellesmere.
Yeah.
So that your life kind of did take that course, but no doubt you will still now experience times of stress and maybe burnout like many of us.
Yeah.
For anybody here today who's facing stress or burnout, what would you say to them? What hope is there?
Yeah. I think it's perspective. So everything happens for a season. And the fact that we all suffer, God is always with us through the suffering. Sometimes you can't sense it, but He is there, and He wants to speak to you. And there's various ways that He could speak to you. He could speak to you through friends and family. He could speak to you through the Bible itself. He could speak to you in meetings like this, and He may well be speaking to someone in the room tonight. There's always hope. You see, life is difficult, and as a pastor, I deal with it, and Billy will say this as well. You see a lot of suffering, you see a lot of death, but we have hope. Easter is coming up, isn't it? And Jesus went to the cross. There, he paid the price for our sins. He was a saviour that made us safe. But after 3 days, He then rose again, and He defeated death. So death is not the end. I always say to people who are struggling, just have an eternal perspective. Look beyond this life and look up. The story, if you're a believer, always will end well. It will have, that happy ending. I took I've done a lot of youth work in my time, and there's a little, well not a little, there's a large canal tunnel near where we live, and it's you walk into it and then it goes completely pitch black because it goes round the bend. How would you do that? I don't know. So you walk in complete darkness, especially if you tell the kids you can't put your torches on. And they're all petrified and they're all scared, and that's kind of what depression can be like sometimes. You feel as if you're walking in the dark all the time, and it doesn't appear to be light at the end of the tunnel. But there is. And you round the bend and you can see this little cheek of light, and it gets brighter and brighter. The light of the truth of Jesus is always there. We just need to look for Him. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
We will move on to the story. I feel like we're moving at pace, but hopefully you'll all have some good questions and we can get into these things a bit more. Billy, thank you for being with us this evening. For those who don't know your story, could you tell us a little bit about what your life was like as a child growing up in Northern Ireland, and what kind of context that was as well for the island at the time?
Yeah, I'll do that. It's just before going into that, there may be some folks here who are unfamiliar with the Northern Ireland situation in the recent history. I'm going to take 2 minutes to give you a crass history lesson, okay? I went to some schools, talked to teenagers just the other week. I was in a local secondary school, talking to about 170 year 10s. That's about fourth form for those of you who are old enough to be back in the old school days. And of that, about 170 kids, we say to them, how many of you are familiar with the historical term Troubles? And only about 3 lifted their hands. So I had to tell them, it was part of this country that you and I live in that was embroiled in civil conflict for 30 years. And so if you study Irish history, go back centuries, and sadly one of the things that marks Irish history is violence. And over the years there have been many attempts to bring about a resolution of the conflict.
just over 100 years ago, back in 1921, Ireland was cut in two. It was partitioned, 26 counties to the south, separate from the United Kingdom, independent Republican state. 6 counties to the north, still linked to the United Kingdom. But within that 6-county northern state, there was a very sizable Roman Catholic minority who wanted to sever the link to the United Kingdom. So right from the very moment of the birth of the northern state, there was a potential for violence, because there was a very sizable community that found itself, back on again, there was a very sizable section of the community that found itself disenfranchised. So throughout the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there were periodic outbursts of violence, but it never really lasted too long. I was born late 50s, so growing up in the 1960s, and historically there was what they term trouble bubbling underneath the surface. But what was captivating my imagination growing up in the 60s was President Kennedy had made a promise, or he sort of made a statement at the beginning of the 60s. By the end of this decade, you'll have a man on the moon. And I can remember sitting with my dad watching, those BBC science programs. So I think it was David Burke, who was the science correspondent, and the old black and white sort of TV, but watching these huge Saturn V rockets taken off from Cape Canaveral. Boy, that captivated my imagination as a wee boy growing up, So there was my mum, dad, older sister, older brother, myself, and then a younger sister. It was very happy, loving, secure family home. I remember my mum as a wee boy going around the house cleaning and singing country songs. I love her country music today, which I attribute to my mum. Going around the place singing. So that was me growing up in the 60s.
And so you had a very happy childhood.
Yeah.
But I think as you were about 12, I think it was that changed radically. What happened to your family?
68, 69, as the troubles as they began historically, erupted in the streets of Belfast and Derry. Most people at the time thought, this is just going to last a few months and then it will all die down and we'll all come to their lives again, just like those other outbursts of violence in the 50s and 40s, etc. British troops were deployed in the streets of Belfast and Derry in August 69. As I say, for a wee boy of 11, there was a novelty factor in that, to see the British troops with their armoured personnel carriers, their foot patrols, their guns, etc. But will the Americans get the man on the moon? That's captivating my imagination more than what's unfolding in the streets of Belfast. So yeah, where it impacted my own life personally was Saturday the 27th of June, 70. By the time here this evening, I would take you through practically every step that I had that early morning and into the better part of the afternoon with my dad. My mum had come up to my bedroom, woke me up and asked if I would like to go for a walk with my dad. He was going for a walk, but I'd like to join him. I said, yes, get up and get dressed. I had a bit of breakfast and headed off with him. It was a glorious summer's day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was beautiful. And I spent that whole morning and the afternoon with my dad. Also so many precious memories, and yet sad memories, because that night, as my dad was coming home from a night out with his friends, all him and his friends were coming back to our house for tea and coffee and food. My dad said to his friends, I'll run on ahead and tell my wife to get the kettle on. It was about so warm that night. All the women were standing at the doors talking, getting their husbands come home. I was playing in the street waiting on my dad coming back. It was about half 11. There was a blast of machine gun fire, and that was my dad being murdered. We were with that blasting machine on fire, and then it's a second silence, and then the next thing was right the whole night was constant gunfire. It was like a war zone. And I was pulled into a neighbour's house, separated from my mum, and I was sitting in the chair, I had my eyes closed. The adults thought I was sleeping, and people were in and out of the house, and they were saying in hushed whispers, "It's awful, it's terrible, does he know? Has anybody told him?" It was all hush, all of the gunfire. It was incessant, this gunfire. And I got up with a chair, and I ran out the door. It was pitch black. All the street lighting had been put out. You could still see the tracer bullets running up the street. And a hand grabs me and pulls me back. It was my friend's dad. I must have been crying. And I was saying to him, "Where's my daddy? Where's my daddy?" And he said, "Billy, your daddy's not coming home. Your daddy's dead." And we weren't a church-going family, we weren't a religious family. But I remember saying, perhaps this is God's will. And this is all over the gunfire, And he grabbed me by the shoulders. I'm 12 years old. He grabs me by the shoulders, and he nearly shakes the life out of me. And he's shaking me so vigorously, and he's shouting over the gunfire, "This has nothing to do with God. There is no God." And he used an expletive referring to the Republican community across the road, and he said, "It's those across there. Never ever you forget that." I guess, didn't forget. And God, if there was any belief in God, God became irrelevance. There's a God who is so loving, a God who is all powerful, a God who is in control of everything. He could have stopped that news coming crashing into my life. And so, there mustn't be a God. And that's where the troubles impacted my own life. Directly.
And obviously it's such a hard thing to go through at that age, and you've spoken previously about how it started a real hatred really began to sort of take hold in your heart. How did that shape your decisions and actions as you got older?
Some of you who are old enough will remember that tragic period of our history and all the madness that emanated from Ireland. It just didn't impact Northern Ireland, it spilled over in Southern Ireland with people being killed with bomb blasts. Mainland Britain with bombs in Warrington, 2 little boys killed in Manchester, Birmingham, London. And I know, as I speak to you folks tonight, my family do not have a monopoly on violence. And everybody, I guess, reacts differently when it comes to the doorstep. And we reacted with hate, and bitterness, and anger, and rage. And we hear a lot today about, radicalisation. And what radicalises, those buzzwords weren't in vogue back in the 70s, but certainly the concept is there. Do you want to know what radicalises? Seeing your dad's bullet-riddled body brought home in a coffin, and standing as a 12-year-old trying to make sense of it. Standing beside your mum, who's now a basket case. I remember the day of my dad's funeral. It's not like England, where somebody dies in England a month later, sometimes you're still waiting in the funeral. Northern Ireland, the dying Monday, buried by Wednesday. That's part of a turnaround. And the Tuesday my dad's funeral, because he was one of the civilians that we murdered, a place where thousands of people, maybe coming out of curiosity, I don't know, but there's thousands that are cameras, TV from around the world. I'm standing with my uncle to bring my dad's coffin to the home. My mum adds on to it. Her screams were absolutely horrendous. And she's screaming, don't take my husband, don't take my husband. What am I going to do? And they had to pry her fingers off the coffin to get it out of the family home. And I'm standing as a 12-year-old watching this. I'm saying it's going to be paid. You want to know what radicalizes? She was 3 months pregnant when my dad was killed. 6 months later to the day, after he's murdered and killed others born. Never, ever saw his dad. And I still remember him as a wee boy running in off the street, running up to my mum and asking what a daddy was. See my mum just crumble, trying to explain why there's no father figure in the home. You want to know what radicalizes? I'm not saying this to justify, what I did. I'm just saying they were factors and pushing me on the path where I wanted revenge. And from the age of 16, nobody pushed my arm up my back. I sought out and joined a loyalist Irish group. And sadly, we live in a world where we're all too familiar with terrorism. I don't need to go into any more details. We're familiar with the activities of these folks.
Do you want to talk about your time in that group and what that looked like?
I could keep you here the rest of the night, talking about the real, the evil people. Not to bring any, because I want the glory and any evil or anything, but we aren't pushed for time, so when folks want to talk afterwards, gladly talk. But what I would say is, I didn't go in to sit and do nothing. I went in this organisation as a 16-year-old to be active. And on the 19th of February 1976, I was part of the two-man execution squad that went out in cold-blooded, callously, brutally, without any twinge of conscience, took the life of another human being. And so, that's, I didn't go into say specific putting the thumbs. That's what I wanted to do when I was young.
And because of that, you were arrested a couple of weeks later and sent to the next prison. And that was kind of the start of, I guess maybe a turning point in your life. Can you kind of tell us what kind of happened during your time in prison?
Yeah, well, I was arrested 2 weeks later, 17, when I was arrested, 19th of February, it was a shooting, 8th of March 76, when I was arrested by myself in the Maid's prison. My God and the Bible by this time were totally irrelevant, had no time for God or religion. And so God did not feature in my life, period. And because we're pushed for time, really it was in the Maid's prison that God came crashing into my life. And nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So I went into prison in 76, 5 years into the sentence, Christmas Eve 1980. It was the night that God came crashing into my life. A woman called Gladys Blackburn, she was a retired school teacher, came down in a cell in the prison. She simply lifted down a Bible and she started to read from Luke chapter 23, the story of the crucifixion. Two thieves crucified on either side of Jesus, both of them blaspheming him, shouting at him, cursing him. But then one of them has a change of heart, shouts across his partner and crying, here, hold on a minute. We're guilty. He's innocent. We deserve what we're getting. He doesn't. And he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And it was at that 42nd verse in Luke chapter 23 that really, I found, it was God was convicting me of my state before before him, a holy and a righteous God. You know, see, before this, if you had met me in prison and said, were you justified in taking another life? I would tenaciously argue, yes, I was justified. My actions were just. But, you know, that's warped thinking. But when I came face to face with the cross of Christ and what Jesus Christ was doing on the cross, there was no justification. I was guilty. I stood in Belfast High Court on the 12th of May 1977, found guilty of that crime, too young to be given a life sentence, and arrogant, defiantly, along with my partner in crime, laughed in the judge's face. Such was my contempt for man's justice. But when I came face to face that night with the cross of Christ and the reality of what he was doing on the cross, there was no justification. I was guilty. And I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt. And I asked that woman, how do you become a Christian? She said, it's as simple as ABC, accept Jesus Christ died for you, believe it, and then you go out and tell it to others. And it was that night, Christmas Eve 1988, that I'm in the knees in the cell, it's about 7 of them in prison, repented of my sin, and threw a waste of life before Almighty God. Now, there was no flashes of lightning, claps of thunder, a funny mystical experience. It was a simple prayer of faith. And God heard that. And you say, well, how do you know he heard it? Because it wasn't, all the hate, all the bitterness, all the anger, all the rage, all those negative things that characterized my life up to that point, they went like that. They went immediately. Looking back, if there was anything subjective, yes, there was a peace. It felt clean. And there was a contentment. Nobody's content in prison, but there was certain contentment after that encounter with the cross of Christ. And my life was radically changed. My attitudes, values, and beliefs radically changed as a result of that encounter with the Lord Jesus Christ that Christmas Eve night, 1980. So that was 5 years into the sentence, right? And then I served just under another 5 years before I was released in 1985. I served a very short space of time, for the seriousness of the crime that I was involved in. But I've probably done about 10 sort of questions there, haven't I? So.
No, that's good. I think maybe some people might be thinking, or questioning maybe the fact that you believe that you're forgiven by God for what you've done. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to talk a wee bit more about it when I wrap up in the evening as well. So, some people think, well, how can you talk about God forgiving you? How can you be so sure that God has forgiven you? Well, basically, take God on his word. God says that if I come to Jesus, he said, you come to me, I will never turn you away. And I believe. Okay? I look what the Bible says about what my life was like before I was a Christian. Tick all the boxes. And then I look at what my life should be like after becoming a Christian, and then tick the boxes, right? So that there's a change there. But why? People say, how can God forgive you? Well, say, God has been in the business of forgiving people like me and it's not such a big surprise. The two thieves which I mentioned, most commentators think were first century Paris. So the first person converted, post-cross was Paris. God's in that business of changing the likes of me. Moses was a murderer. The guy who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, or it's inspired by God, right? The first 5 books of the Bible, like the Ten Commandments, etc. Moses murdered. King David, to whom we owe, the book of Psalms, the greatest Canaanite in Israel. He murdered. God forgave. The Apostle Paul, to whom you know the bulk of the New Testament, he was party to the first Christian martyr. So God's been in the business of changing Christian and into the pastorate is not trying to convince the likes of me that you need forgiveness. You never need forgiveness when I was confronted with the cross of Christ that night. It's trying to convince decent people that they need forgiveness. People who are good neighbours, good husbands, good wives. People who appreciate that I would wish that person was my neighbour. Trying to convince those people they need forgiveness. That's what's hard.
Now, I'm sure there's many people here this evening who fall into that category. What would you kind of want to say to them? What would you kind of want them to remember and to take away from you hearing your story tonight?
Oh, right. You know, it's I'm going to be touching on this shortly. And Hannah, so yeah, it would be that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. People could think, I'm not a sinner, but God says that we have all sinned. Every one of us have sinned and fallen short of His glory. So it's His standard, it's important, not our standard. So it's God's standard. And if you've fallen short of God's standard, then you need to come to the Lord Jesus Christ, because forgiveness is the priority. And that's what we'll be speaking on in a wee second, just to round things up. Won't keep you for me, just 10-minute round up, but forgiveness is the priority for everyone.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you. We are going to wrap up this first part of the evening, and we're going to take a short break. Please help yourself to some refreshments, which are just on the side there. If something has resonated with you, it's a good moment now to kind of reflect and to talk about it with people you've come with.